I'm Matt Shakman. I'm the director of the Fantastic Four.
And I'm Casper Farahani. I'm the production designer of Fantastic Four.
We wanted to start the movie with a logo that was different from the ones you've seen before, so we don't have the classic Marvel flip. This one is by Swarovski, a great design studio, and it's meant to feel retro, but also a little bit retro-futuristic, which was the whole design aesthetic of the movie. We just saw an establishing shot that says Earth 828. We were on a different Earth in a different universe from the traditional Marvel storytelling, and we named it 828 in honor of Jack Kirby's birthday, who was August 28th was his birthday, and he was the creator, one of the co-creators with Stan Lee of the Fantastic Four.
Can you give me 12 seconds?
We should probably talk about that building which you designed.
Yes, yeah. So that building, the famed Baxter Building, we have taken a slightly different direction in the design of that building, heavily inspired by the kind of optimism and dynamism of the Jet Age architecture. Specifically, we're looking at the work of Eero Saarinen and Oscar Niemeyer. And you'll also notice, obviously, the location of it is very different from what we may have seen previously in comics. Early on, Matt knew that it wanted to occupy approximately the footprint of the UN in the real world. And that's because it was going to have an integrated launch pad, and it made the most sense for it to be in a body of water as opposed to in the middle of the city.
We were heavily inspired by the space race and by the Apollo 11 launches, and we love the idea of people gathering at a distance with their cameras and their binoculars to see these incredible moments when launches happened. And we knew there would be a big one in our movie too, so we wanted that idea of people gathering across the river to look at the Baxter Building. And in our universe, it's the Future Foundation instead of the United Nations, so it was nice that they were occupying the same place. And the actual United Nations building is a Niemeyer building too, right?
That's right. He's one of the architects that worked on that building. Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the other things that we were inspired by was the World's Fair of the mid-'60s in New York. And, it was very much this idea of, what will the future look like? And there were monorails and there were unispheres and there were, saucer-shaped buildings and all this wonderful stuff. And the idea was, well, what if that World's Fair was the entire city? And so we brought that, language and that sense of a monorail and saucer-shaped buildings and all of that into a New York that was very much based in the 60s. So it's a blend of that sort of retro future and a familiar 1960s New York.
Yeah, early in the conversations with Matt, we kind of arrived at this determinative variable in our world versus the world that the audience lives in, which is kind of inflection point for the design of New York was the birth of Reed Richards. And we kind of theorized that, like, if he's approximately in his mid-30s and we're approximately in the mid-60s, that he was born around 1930-ish, and that maybe 20 years later, his influence would start to be perceived in the world. And so that any building kind of built prior to 1950 might be similar, but every building after that might start to see some of his influence.
He's sort of Steve Jobs meets Einstein. He's inventing things that are finding its way into daily life, like robots and flying cars, but also architecture. And so Reed Richards' imprint is kind of everywhere. This is Apollo 11. This is one of the big references we already talked about, space race, that sense of JFK optimism. And I love the idea of the Fantastic Four in place of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin being the first to space. And this ready room here, which actually was in the basement of our production office at Pinewood Studios, couldn't believe it, was dressed to match an Apollo 11 documentary from IMAX that was incredible, done on the anniversary of the trip to the moon. You want to talk about finding that?
I mean, this was it was kind of a tone-setting thing, and we wanted this to be hyper-realistic, to try to ground it as much as possible in the archival imagery of the Apollo 11 documentary, and try to really recreate as much of that as possible to start the film off in this like hyper grounded archival feeling, to then move from, hopefully visually move from that in the design to this, to the retrofuturism, to the jet age stuff.
And this is a Times Square that we're familiar with, except we've brought in giant televisions, we've invented our own billboards, created a lot of our own products, also worked with partners to bring, like Little Caesars ads from the 60s in there and other vintage commercials. But we built this Times Square.
Yeah.
And it's, at what scale was it of the real Times Square?
It was 2/3 of the original Times Square, which as it goes for a movie set is pretty massive, actually. Everything was built up to 30 feet, in a couple places slightly higher than that. So for so much of the coverage, hopefully we were able to stay in camera. But of course, in the wides, our VFX team built out the rest of the world, and we got to see this beautiful skyline silhouette.
At the opening of the Pan Am Tower.
It was amazing. You could go into every store, the hotel, you could go into the sandwich shop, and there were sandwiches and a rotating sort of, automatic machine to put your money in. Everything was done with such amazing detail. And that was a big part of what we wanted to do, was build as much as possible and to make things as practical as possible, because I just think that fools the eye. It makes the audience believe the world so much more. And so the Times Square set was one of them. The Baxter Building. We started the movie in the Reed and Sue's bedroom, which is a gorgeous practical set that was connected to their living room and their kitchen. It was a full apartment that you could walk through and connect through. This is a fantastic car.
Fantastic
talking
car.
about. Well, that's my daughter, Maisie Shakman, there getting saved by Johnny Storm. She loved to be on the wires that day. The hardest part of it was getting her not to smile as she was in mortal danger being saved. But that was a great day. But yeah, do you want to talk about the amazing Fantastic Car?
Yeah, Fantastic Car was an absolute joy to work on. It's one of those rare treats. You don't often get to design a car and build a couple of them. And so the Fantastic Car is obviously a storied piece of the comics. And so we were treading very lightly on picking the details to try to keep. And while we were overall moving in a somewhat different direction, we were trying to move more literally towards a car. But one of the kind of essential pieces of the Fantastic Car has always been this sort of diamond configuration of seating. And that's something that we wanted to keep even in our version of the car. So our version of the car is
half Detroit
Yeah.
and half retro future.
half retro future. Yeah. We were looking a lot at these like turbine powered American concept cars, particularly the Firebird 4 was a huge inspiration. And there's another Chrysler turbine car that was a big inspiration, because the turbines are really cool because they're so overtly retrofuturistic. That idea that turbines could power an automobile is a super retrofuturistic car, and naively optimistic. You can take your pick of which adjective, but super fun. So we wanted to have like a really elegant, sleek, beautiful car that also had some of the right form language for something that is a flying vehicle more than half of the time. But we also wanted to really ground it in some iconic retrofuturistic stuff, which is why you have the bullet heads coming out of the centers of the turbines, and turbines on all four corners, and the thin venting, all those kind of distinctly retrofuturistic details to contrast the sleek, elegant forms.
And it was a real car, and every part of it worked. You could open and close the doors and the canopy, and it had an amazing fast engine. It could tear through the streets. It really was a marvelous work of engineering.
It could be done, but I'm going to add a little more garlic. Not because it's not delicious. I just want to add a little bit of zip. Okay?
We've come into the Baxter Building, and we should probably comment here on the interior space, which again keeps some of these beautiful curves that you see in like Saarinen, that you would see in like the TWA terminal at JFK, which is now a hotel. And unbelievable attention was paid to palette as well, which I want to just comment on. Your work and Alex Byrne, the costume designer's work, and Jess Hall, the cinematographer, all working together really carefully to kind of make a palette that spoke to each other. Look at what she's wearing. Look at what the kitchen cabinets are looking like. Everything is speaking to each other in a really interesting way.
That's right. Very early on, Jess pulled a bunch of really helpful, great references from 60s and 70s films, The Graduate, 2001, of course, The French Connection. There were like a lot of great references, and we locked in on a group on a very large palette, and then we systematically winnowed it down to a few dozen colors. And that was very helpful to reach that consensus so early in the process.
And everything about this space I love. It was a gorgeous practical set. The work of the craftsman who built it is unbelievable. The sunken living room that looks out over New York City on one side and on the rocket pad on the other side. And then this kitchen, which brings to life all the things I love so much about the 60s, including like the house of tomorrow, the house of the future, the idea of, everything in the kitchen is the fantastic kitchen, right? So the cabinets drop down, they're automated, things turn and twist,
That's right.
pop up and down. And it was just so much fun figuring out how to use all of that stuff, including this chalkboard, which also was articulated here in Reed's lab, another marvelous set that would go up and down and was cantilevered to kind of where he could move to whatever he needed to work on.
Yeah, our special effects team did a great job with the Fantastic Car, of course, but also with all these little practical actuated things like the chalkboard, like the cake display in the kitchen and it was really great. And of course with the Herbies.
Let's talk about Herbie.
Yeah.
So Herbie is a wonderful practical thing combined with some visual effects. And he started his design is really driven by Ryan Meinerding, who's head of visual development at Marvel, who is a wonderful artist and a huge Fantastic Four fan. And he really led the charge on designing Herbie, who's just absolutely adorable and looks very much of the era. He's got this kind of computer disc eyes and the way he sounds is kind of a lot of that that's driven by the actual, mechanics of him. But at the same time, he's got Matthew Wood, who is our sound supervisor, an amazingly talented person from Skywalker, who helped create Wall-E and a lot of Star Wars droids and was the voice of General Grievous and the Phantom Menace and all those movies, or not Phantom Menace, but the later Star Wars prequels. He helped bring the sort of human aspect to Herbie's voice, but he's brought to life in part by a full animatronic that was created by our special effects team, that required lots of people operating different aspects of it, controlling the arms, controlling him as he moved around the space, his eyes, his head, turning, nodding, twisting. And then he was also a puppet that was puppeteered by a wonderful guy named Jack Parker, who was an actor. He helped stage the scenes. He was heavily involved in where Herbie would be, what his attitude was. The actors could act off of him in a way just like they would another actor. And Herbie is, he's happy, he's joyful, he's put upon, he's exhausted, he's annoyed. He's got all those great characteristics of any actor. And so he would run this puppet through the scene, and then we would paint him out around and add some arms or do some extra stuff to kind of bring him to life. So Herbie is very much that performance from Jack. And we had some other puppeteers who worked on our second unit as well, who did similar things, bringing Herbie to life.
Transmission today. Have you listened to it yet? More of the same. It's a complex.
You want to talk about this set with its 3 circles?
Yeah. So this is Reed's lab. As you can see, it's got this sort of like coffered, textured ceiling. The idea for this was that it was supposed to be a bit of a fortified kind of bunker-like environment, so that when Reed is doing all kinds of cutting edge, at times dangerous experiments like the one we're about to witness here, that he, in his architecture, in the architectural design of the space, he anticipated the need for a fortification to protect the rest of the building and the rest of the city from what might happen in this room as he's finding the cutting edge of technology.
And what I also love is that it looks like a cathedral.
Yeah.
Right? It has that kind of like to
awesome.
knowledge. And,
right.
It's beautiful.
That's cool. Thank you. And you can also definitely see the influence from 2001 in terms of our palette. And what we were doing here, though, is that there's meaning behind the color. The red area is the sort of a workstation area where electronics are done, robotics are done, chemistry work. Basically, where anything that's dirty, where he gets his hands dirty and he's using the physical world to solve problems, that happens in the red area. The yellow area is kind of contemplative and the space for discussion. There's chalkboards, there's some, whatever relevant references that he's looking at the time. And then there's a lot of seating for the rest of the Fantastic Four to join him and discuss and have meetings. And then finally, there's the blue area, which is the sort of computing area. Everything from, monitoring the skies to communication, mission control, absolutely heavily involved in the functions of the Excelsior rocket. all of that stuff happens in the blue area.
It's worth saying that like this MRI machine with this curved screen here, the earlier cereal box we saw on the table with Johnny Storm on the back, every tiny little gadget and gizmo had to be designed. Everything in this movie had to be designed. Everything. Kazra was overseeing an enormous team of people, including Ty's prop master, Jillian, set decorator, incredible group of people who were manufacturing so much of this. You can't just go out and rent this stuff. We had to make it all. And it all had to be part of a cohesive design language. So we felt like we were in a world that Reed Richards had designed a lot of the things in. And, you know, the curves, the way the curved screens speak to the curved architecture, speaks to the curves of the Fantasticar, the Excelsior. Everything has a sort of a coherence in terms of design language. And we should also probably say, you know, this movie is about family. And here we are in a beautiful scene where we get to see Sue using her powers of invisibility to show Franklin to Reed for the first time, to literally make him speechless. And we started the movie with a domestic scene of them in their bedroom, in their bathroom. We meet Sue Storm sitting on the toilet doing a pregnancy test. I wanted this movie to feel like a real family, to come at it in a really unorthodox way, that you meet them as real people first, because that's really what I love about the Fantastic Four. They are real people. They are family first. They are scientists, explorers second, and they're superheroes kind of only when they have to be, when their world is threatened, when their family's threatened. They're real people. Like here's Ben on Yancey Street, based on, you know, Delancey Street in New York, Lower East Side, where Jack Kirby, you know, grew up and spent a lot of time. And here's Ben, who's, you know, kind of a local hero to these kiddos. And this is a backlot at Pinewood, a gorgeous set built by Kazra. You want to talk about this?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. The art department, set tech department, our amazing construction department did a fantastic job building a second New York backlot set. And like Matt pointed out, this is very much inspired by the Lower East Side, which is a very distinct visually from Times Square and Midtown. You know, so here in a way you can look around, the palette is warm, very Hopper-like, as opposed to the kind of futuristic cool blues and grays that you see in Times Square. Also, you know, there's not a ton of retrofuturism here. Here, it's like a sleepier part of the city that hasn't yet been descended upon in terms of some of that tech. Now, you look over the tops of the buildings, and there are moments where you see the retrofuturism other places in Lower Manhattan poking out. But we wanted this to feel like this kind of cozy and timeless, warm, very neighborhoody place where everybody knows your name, and where Ben has always been a kind of a central figure to the culture of the place.
Yeah, and it doesn't change. He even says that in the scene, you know, that's part of its charm. There's so much change, so much rapid change. There's something nice about Yancey Street always staying the same. Got Maisie's Cookies there, named after my daughter, Maisie Shakman. I'm a shameless dad. But it was a beautiful set. And, you know, it's a place where lots of different cultures come together too, which is great, including there's the synagogue. You know, Ben is Jewish in the comics, and so was Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, and we were trying to honor that, as well as all of the other cultures that you see colliding on that Lower East Side. Immigrant culture is kind of coming together, which is really beautiful. Here's the Fantastic Kitchen doing its thing, reluctantly going down.
Included 2 extras. I don't know why.
And just to talk about costuming, we wanted them to feel like real people. You know, they wear those tech suits. We call them tech suits, not superhero suits. They're incredibly well made. They honor the comic books. They were beautifully R&D'd by Alex Byrne, and they're difficult to make and be, you know, to be believable that each one of them with their different power sets could use these suits to support their powers. But when they're at home and they're not doing anything super, they're dressed like everybody else. They're dressed like everybody from the 60s here, to feel as grounded as possible, because we want to believe them as a real family.
And so elegantly, all of this stuff, all of Alex's work on this is so restrained and beautiful and sets the period so well. And even, I mean, the tech suits in particular, I think that's such a tricky thing to do, to have as much subtlety as she achieved in those tech suits, and yet they feel every bit as fantastic as they need to, and at once super elegant. And fashionable in a way, you know, like really beautiful.
She's remarkable. She is equally at home in prestige drama. She's won an Oscar for doing Elizabeth, the Golden Age, been nominated countless times for the most amazing sort of period classical stuff that you would expect. And then she's also done Avengers and Thor and, all of these amazing Doctor Strange, Marvel stuff. So she understands the superhero world. She understands big scope film, and she also understands period and, this kind of artistic integrity that she brings to everything she does. And she was really the perfect person for this film because she brings all these skills together, and kind of, I think this movie is a great showcase for her range, as
Absolutely.
Same with you and same with Jess and all the amazing people who built this world. Here's Julia Garner. It's the Silver Surfer, Shalabal. This was her first day filming with us. She showed up. I put her in a mocap suit, put her 30 feet up on a scissor lift in Kazra's amazing hyper-realistic Times Square set with 500 period background artists dressed in their best period clothes. The Fantastic are there. All 4 of our actors put a mic on her and a giant speaker and said, "Hey, tell everybody they're going to die." And Julia Garner, who's fearless and is absolutely amazing, was like, "You got it." And went up there and terrified us all. And also, what I think is so beautiful about this performance is you can see that she carries a burden. Every planet she comes and tells that their time is up, she feels it, which is something we obviously exploit in the narrative of the film. The Fantastic Four exploit in terms of trying to get her to their side. She feels the weight of her job. Tough job. He's a Galactus tough boss. Toxic relationship, I think.
Yeah.
But
you can see that. You're absolutely right. You can see that in her face and the reluctance, the resignation, the sad regret of it all. It's really powerful.
I mean, it's worth talking about Scott Stockdike, Lisa Mara, our VFX team. Scott was our supervisor. Lisa was our producer. And their amazing work. And then all of the vendors that worked under them. In this case, this is SPI, Sony Pictures Imageworks, doing this Surfer here. But there's, many different vendors, ILM and Weta, Digital Domain, amazing VFX houses working on this film. But we knew that the movie wouldn't work if we didn't have a Ben Grimm, a thing that was believable and real and just as real as everybody else in the film. We knew it wouldn't work if we didn't have a surfer who couldn't, be expressing the emotion that we needed her to express and go on a journey and an arc. And the secret of both of this is that they're driven by 2 amazing actors, in Julia Garner and Evan Moss-Backrack. But it's up to these amazing VFX vendors to make sure they're capturing that performance, making sure that performance is being translated through rock, to be brought to life really realistically. And I think you can see it. I mean, the thing is a miracle throughout this film. It has Eben's sense of humor. It has his gruffness, his heart of gold, his very unique sort of way of approaching, this character, which was so beautiful and absolutely perfect for it, is there in this performance. And in order to bring it to life, we used a lot of different methods. Alex and her team built costumes at scale. Barry Gower, this amazing prosthetics artist who I've worked with since Game of Thrones, he built a full Ben suit with a foam latex head and articulated hands. Amazing. And we put the clothes on that stand-in Ben, who had an actor inside, Richard Summers Calvert, who watched all the blocking, knew what was happening. And we would film him in the scene. Sometimes we even used him in the wide shots. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it was a reference, because whenever you're doing anything with VFX, if you have something real to look at and say, no, this is what the clothing looks like. No, this is what light looked like reflecting off of Ben's head in this moment. It helps all of the artists to know what real is. Yeah. And then they can make it look real. Yeah. Because so much when you make things up completely in VFX, you spend a ton of time debating, like, what's real? Well, would it look more real if there were birds flying through? Like, how do we make it more real? Sure. Add a flare. Yeah. But what this did is it gave us a real one-to-one for what something real looked like, what Ben looked like. Yeah. And we also went out to the desert and found a rock, which we called Jenny from the Rock, which we thought this is what Ben's skin should look like. And we were going to film this rock in every single lighting environment. And it really matters. Like, I'm not just saying just filming this rock in this lab. I mean, filming the rock in this section in the middle, because the lighting of that is very different from the lighting in the blue and the red, how the bounce of the light, color, they all change dramatically in terms of their color space and how they look within the room. So you have to be, continually sort of diligent about trying to capture as much information as possible to make it look real. And we did the same
I
with
think it paid off. I mean, hugely, because I think it's absolutely true that they did an incredible job translating faithfully Eben's performance, and that like you can see this and you can see the performance. I remember it from standing there on set, and yet they've also, because of all of this rigorous methodology that you've just described, they have. Scott and his team have achieved what I think nobody has done so far, which is to absolutely capture the spirit of Ben Grimm from the comics. The silhouette, the kind of the way he occupies a space, his body language feels so faithful to what we've seen in the comics in a way that I don't think anything else has even come close to this.
It's true. And, Ben has been drawn in a lot of different ways, a lot of different sizes. But what I always loved about the Kirby Ben is that he's the same height as Ben Grimm was before he went up to space. He's the height of Eben, which is around 6'1", I think. He looks eye to eye with everybody else. He's not the Incredible Hulk. He's a person, with deep humanity, an incredibly gruff exterior, but probably the warmest, gooeyest inside of all of them, and I think he was brought beautifully to life. We should talk about the fact that we just saw the Excelsior on its launch pad behind, and they're getting ready to go to space. We're building towards our Apollo 11 launch. And in this interest of doing everything practically, we built a miniature. I didn't personally do it. Neither did Kazra.
No.
But Ian, an amazing miniature and model maker, has worked a lot with Chris Nolan, did Interstellar and other films with him, and is a legend. Built this incredible, I think it was 14-foot tall Excelsior miniature, because we talked a lot about 2001. We talked a lot about these great movies from the 60s that were using practical effects, and we wanted to do that as much as possible. We talked about the aesthetic of the movie being where Kirby meets Kubrick. And how would Stanley Kubrick have done it? He would have built a miniature. And so we wanted to do that too. And again, much like having a rock from the desert, if you have a miniature in a lighting environment, you know exactly what that spaceship should look like. And that helped us. There are a bunch of shots of the actual miniature in the movie, but the ones where we had to use full CG, we always had the miniature as a backup, a reference to know what we were talking about. This is one of my favorite moments, Ben seeing himself in human form, and then the TV turning off and seeing the thing in reflection, and feeling that humanity and the weight of it. And we understand this is a private moment for him, and the burden that he carries. He's the one member of the four who can't turn off his power, who can't make himself human. And, he loses his confidence and doesn't go talk to Natasha Lyonne's Rachel and walks away. But then he comes over here and he puts on a brave face for Reed, right? And Reed's basically feeling guilty about the last time they went to space and what happened and the accident and how it's all his fault, which is a classic Reed Richards thing. He feels tremendous guilt for what happened to everybody. And Ben says, don't worry about it. It's fine. Stop worrying about it. You're not that smart. And then we get to see them goofing around the way, best friends, people who've known each other for a long time. That's one of the things I really wanted to try to get, was just this sense of history. And you want the characters to feel lived in. You want the world to feel lived in. Yeah. You want, even though you're building this incredibly beautiful Times Square set, it needs to feel like it's New York City.
That's right.
That there's gum and there's trash, or there's all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so wherever we could make it feel real. Let's talk about there was a glimpse of it for a second there, but that was Calatrava.
Calatrava's beautiful building in Oviedo, Spain, that we were lucky enough to have the privilege of filming in. Our locations team did a great job finding what was not easy to find, which was like a lobby space and a kind of assembly hall space location that matched the aesthetic of the Baxter apartment and the Baxter building exterior and the Reed's lab that we designed. These dynamic spaces based on parabolic curves that you see throughout the film, whether you're looking at the Excelsior rocket or the Fantastic Car or these blast shields coming up from the sea. You constantly are seeing these conic sections, these curves of parabolas all over the place. And so it made it impossible to find a location in London that would work for a lobby. We talked about shooting at the TWA terminal in New York. It didn't end up being practical for us, and then we found this amazing building in Spain,
which you're going to see in a moment or two when Reed's doing his speech in all of its glory, which has this. He's doing it here on stage, and when we cut wide here, you'll see this is an actual space in Spain. no VFX here except some crowd replication because we didn't have 2,000 background artists, unfortunately, in Spade. But it's gorgeous. And that also served as our Baxter lobby, which we see as well in the movie. And then let's talk about the Excelsior interior, which I think is, maybe my personal favorite set. I mean, this thing is so gorgeous from just form standpoint, but also function. Like it has the detail is very Apollo 11 meets 2001. Kazar and his team had thought through every button. There was someone there on set with us who could be like, if you press this button, this is what's going to happen, which is wonderful as a filmmaker. And as for the actors too, to be like, oh, okay, this is how we dock with the faster than light engine. This is how we launch. We'll get back to it in a second, but this is all, based off of Apollo 11 documentary photography, really. Like all of these things are drawn from the space program in the 60s. It's amazing how the decade was defined by this, looking to the future, looking to space, looking to the unknown, and feeling like the right technology, the right heart, the right mind would get you there. It's that JFK stuff of like, by the end of this decade, we're going to put a person on the moon. That is informing everything. I have this beautiful Taschen book of advertisements from decade by decade. And the 60s one, when you flip through it, is all rockets and models wearing space helmets, and it's just a part of everything. Every kid's toy is a rocket. It really was in the idea of little of the family there, of the little girl sitting on her dad's shoulder looking and dreaming of space, really was what was fueling this whole section of the movie.
And also I feel like that was such a big inspiration for the way the whole world looked, in that like it felt like we were trying to take the world that was promised in all those advertisements that you just described, but in this world they weren't just pie in the sky. All of it came to pass, and it didn't come to pass in decades, in the distant future. It came to pass right then at the time that they imagined it, or that is the kind of secret sauce of our retrofuturism in so many ways, that all those promises were real.
Clear.
The shot of the Excelsior heading towards this faster than light engine, the FTL, is right out of the little Pan Am jet flying towards the space station by intentionally, and then also borrowing a little bit from Christopher Nolan and sort of how he mounts cameras in Interstellar with the air jets coming off the side. There were so many different inspirations. We looked at Apollo 13. We looked at The Right Stuff. We looked at every great movie about space, every documentary about space. But one of the things here, as we are in zero gravity in the Excelsior, is that I really wanted it to be a zero-G environment when they are in space. I love Marvel. I love Marvel space movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, and I love Star Trek, but they're just walking around. But in order for this to feel like the 60s and Space Race and Apollo 11, I needed them to be floating around. I wanted to feel like the space was dangerous. Space was difficult, that all of these things weren't easy. And then having zero G allowed us, as we head into this sequence, to do some pretty amazing things that we otherwise wouldn't have. Which we'll get to, of course, in a little bit. But do you want to talk about Excelsior design? Yeah,
absolutely. So the design of the Excelsior was interesting because there's basically three kind of major functional jobs that the ship had to do. Is like, number one, it had to have the kind of vernacular of a shuttle, which is very aircraft-like, very plane-like in terms of what the workstation of the cockpit feels like. And the design of the exterior with the rockets attached at the end of each fin, because it has to basically serve the purpose of getting out of gravity. So you see that in terms of what the cockpit looks like. The second function is the function of a zero-G environment, like which is more of a workstation where there's padded surfaces and workstations upside down and all this, which is different than what a plane is like. And so we had to kind of merge those two aesthetics for the interior. And then the third kind of job the ship had was this faster than light travel, which is how we kind of arrived at this idea of an exterior faster than light engine that it could dock into and use as needed, and that this engine would stay in space, perhaps even be used as a space station when not being used as an engine.
It's all gone. The whole planet.
And it was 13% larger than Earth.
we've just seen Galactus's world ship make its introduction, and how do you eat a planet was something I thought a lot about, because he ranges in size in the comics, from being just 20 feet tall to being 1,000 feet tall, sometimes bigger, and so I wanted to think about it as realistically as possible, as scientifically as possible. And so we talked to scientists. We talked to Dr. Clifford Johnson, who was our amazing advisor throughout this whole process. And was like, well, what kind of planets would you want to eat? Why would you want to eat planets with life on them? He's like, well, carbon. You would need carbon. That would be the fuel. Yeah. It would make sense that you would eat planets with life on them.
Right.
And then I thought about, well, his ship should be like a big factory.
Yeah.
It's the idea is that he's going to consume an entire planet, but he's still somewhat of a humanoid shaped kind of character, right? He has to process that somehow. So that's how we came up with this idea of this giant drill that essentially goes through a planet. And as it's drilling through, it's sucking everything in through the front and the back. And then it enters inside, into, when we go inside, we see how all this material has been sucked in, and it's part of a big assembly line. It's being, ground up by big giant grinders. It's being sent through purification. It's being burned by these enormous giant furnaces. And eventually it's being purified into this kind of magma blood, this lava, pure energy that's being pumped into the very center of the ship through big tubes right into the back of Galactus. So when we meet him, we see that he's this cosmic space vampire hooked up to his blood supply, and that this entire ship exists to create this blood for him to survive off of.
Yeah, the interior of the world ship was our moment to create the cathedral to Kirby, also to really celebrate these kind of distinctive geometric shapes and motifs that you see
right there,
for instance, in so much of Kirby's work. It was a challenge to translate his beautiful, very high contrast style, which is so often just white and black, into a fully photographic environment and still keep the spirit of it. That was the goal here. Absolutely. Here are those furnaces that you're talking about, Matt, where the raw materials, the good stuff is burned and purified into that energy.
We spent a lot of time thinking about scale, right? Because this is an enormous ship, which has the largest thing in the universe inside of it. Constantly trying to think about how do we make this space feel believably large. And when you watch Star Wars, and the ship flies over the top, you understand its scale because you see the little doors, the little windows, and they're human sized. But this is a Galactus ship.
Yeah.
Everything is Galactus sized.
Yeah.
So until you get a tiny surfer, a tiny Fantastic Four character walking along, it's only then that you realize the scope and the scale of it. But we also realized that it was going to be impossibly large. We talked about going to factories. We talked about where could we go that's enormous in the world that would reflect this. And the fact is there just isn't anything
Nothing big enough. Yeah.
Big enough. So we built huge sections that still are really very, very small, tiny, relative to what the world ship would be. Built the stair type vent that goes up into his chamber here. We built sections of what you kind of called like a worm that was, a series of twisty turned kind of tubes that they would walk along. And depending on lighting and how we sort of framed it, it could be used for lots of different
environments. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, basically it's the scale of a landscape. Right. It's like trying to make an interior, mechanical interior with the scale of Yosemite Valley or something like that.
Here's Galactus in all of his Jack Kirby glory by way of Ryan Meinerding, designing a sort of our take on this. Ryan really led the charge on this. I love that he feels enormous, but like stars. There's all these little lights in his suit. He feels like a star field. There's so much texture.
Ancient.
He feels ancient. He's 14 billion years old, a scientist from another universe who tried to escape the end of his universe and managed to do so. And he was reborn into our universe during the Big Bang, into this universe, 828, as Galactus. He was sort of transformed into Galactus, whose purpose is to consume planets. And he's neither good nor bad in a way, right? He's inevitable, and like Thanos. Right. He's this cosmic force that moves through the universe and probably does some good. Like in the comics, it's great. He's like a gardener in a way, right?
Yeah.
He eats these planets, which allows for new things to grow and for the universe to expand. And so arguably he's helpful.
Yeah.
And in some of the comics, it's great. Reed even argues not to, kill Galactus because he thinks he's necessary.
Like
but,
none of it's personal for Galactus.
It's not personal. They're ants, he just goes and he keeps swimming like a shark through the cosmos. But at the same time, if it's your planet, then he's a bad guy,
It
right?
feels pretty personal.
It feels very, very personal.
Yeah.
And so, just designing this was a great joy. But then it's Ralph Ineson, who's the actor who is playing Galactus, who brings him to life, just like Eben and Julia are bringing Ben Grimm and the Surfer to life. We had Ralph on set here. He's wearing an actual suit, a gorgeous suit built by Alex Byrne and her team that had so much detail in it, and it weighed a ton, and it was hot and uncomfortable, and Ralph never complained because he is just an amazing veteran. But it was wonderful. He sat in a big throne that you built, and we filmed him the way you film a miniature, right? You have a 14-foot tall rocket, but you want to make it feel like it's 1,000 feet long.
Yeah.
You have to flood it with light. You have to consider the lensing of it. You have to film it the same way you would film a miniature rocket to make it feel large. So we filmed the human to make him feel like Mount Rushmore.
Right.
And so there would be no focal fall off. Like everything's in focus on Galactus.
Right.
And there's a ton of real photography that's driving these images, but then SPI, Sony Pictures ImageWorks, is working over the top of that to help kind of integrate it to make it feel old and enormous, and so
Very effective. Very effective.
good combination of different approaches. We should probably talk about these spacesuits, which I absolutely adore, which are, retro future. Earlier, we saw them in their first set of spacesuits, which were much more Apollo 11, but with kind of Fantastic Four covers. But now we've moved more into a Kubrick territory in terms of retro future quality with this great backpack, which reminds me of like a super cool Dyson vacuum from the era, which is incredibly cool. These helmets, which have, really beautiful lines and
so great,
are very much unique, but do nod towards, sort of 2001 and some of the other great sort of space helmet designs of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And each of them is slightly different. There's a red stripe down the line, down Johnny's to nod to his sort of hot rod, Ben has, everyone has sort of slight differences. And one thing about Ben's helmet, which is what we're talking about, is that because he's a rock, he doesn't have to worry about the same thing they have to worry about. He just needs oxygen, needs to protect his eyes, and that's about it. That's why his helmet doesn't fully enclose him.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about here.
Zero G coming back as they burst out of we imagine that Galactus' ship was so large that it had its own gravity, maybe like the moon, slightly less than Earth gravity, but still they were in there. It was toxic. So that's why they're wearing their helmets and everything. Yeah. There's probably limited oxygen, but now they're back out into the vacuum of space. So this sequence was shot with a lot of actors on wires. They were amazing. It's so difficult to act on wires, very uncomfortable, even in sort of something that's incredibly well designed. It's putting a lot of strain on your back. It requires a lot of strong core muscles. The actors did training with Rowley Earlham, our stunt coordinator. And then the set had to be designed to kind of have lots of tracks and ways to open up so that we could put these lines in and kind of and choreograph all of this action to get as much of it in camera as possible. And every now and then Framestore, our vendor here, amazing vendor, took over, and would do part of the body in CG or anything. Mm-hmm. If we like here, there's Reed stretching out and grabbing Sue. We did film a version of that, but we enhanced it using CG to kind of help the zero G of it all. What does a wormhole look like? Again, Dr. Clifford Johnson working with us, working with Framestore, working with Scott, our VFX supervisor. And this is where we came up with something that felt like the mix of real science meets Space Mountain, which was really sort of what I wanted. I wanted this to feel very much like 60s space Disney at its best. Even in the sound design, that kind of synth sound that's coming into the Moog sound, synth sounds that are coming into, into play in the 60s, the 50s, 60s. And the amazing score, as we talk, we're not listening to Michael Giacchino's amazing score, but when he came up with our theme, he said it was a combination of the right stuff and the Disney electrical parade,
Right.
which I absolutely adore because it's the perfect thing. And that's very much the spirit of how a Skywalker was approaching the sound design as well of space here. And then we imagined, they have these blasters, but they're more like a particle accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
And so the back of the ship is like a giant collider like you would have in physics.
That ring you see when you look up from below. Yeah, you see that kind of collider where that this was a great idea of Scott's, where that energy just kind of spins around there and powers this cannon.
So it feels everything is scientific in a way. The Fantastic Four are not your classic superheroes that are, getting into fistfights all the time and, pulling out guns or blasters. But we needed them to have that ability, and they knew they needed to have that ability. But like, what's the most sort of scientifically interesting way to have a blaster? And so we were like, well, it's a collider. They're sending sort of pure accelerated electron energy out at the surfer. And then here she is surfing, which, cool. It's essential to me that the Silver Surfer surfed. And so we gave her a chance to surf on lava in the ship, surfing on in a wormhole. Yeah. What's that look like? And now she's literally surfing the accretion disk of a neutron star, which I think was really, really fun. And we had a couple of amazing professional female surfers come in and help us work with Julia and help us with how a real surfer would move on a board to make sure that the physical language was accurate to surfing, even though the environment is something no one has ever surfed before. But here she is. And so, this is an amazing sequence where they're, heading into the center of a neutron star, which is essentially a black hole. And they're trying to trap her into, going into the gravity well of this neutron star where time will dilate and, her everything for her will go much more slowly. And also will just be exerting so much force on her that it will trap her in there. Yeah. And this is a Reed Richards way of getting out of what seems like an impossible situation. You've got your wife in labor. You're being pursued by a, super-powered cosmic entity you've never seen before. It's a lot of stress. How do you get away with it? And luckily, your wife, who happens to be in labor, also happens to be able to be a master of invisibility. Cloaking. Yeah. And so Sue is able to cloak the ship and they escape. We don't see them doing it, but they do. And the surfer doesn't because of all of the particle dust in the air. And she follows the bait right into the center of the neutron star. And then the ship appears and flies off. So this was a fun mix of miniature and visual effects design, Kazer's amazing set, the stunt coordinator Rowley doing so much amazing work with these actors, these brave actors on wires. But this was one of the things that was, super important to me in this movie, this moment, this birth. I think, Kazer's dad, became one during the second time during the course of this movie. The birth of my daughter remains the most fantastic moment of my life. Yeah. And there's, the journey into the fantastic is really part of what these stories are, whether it's going into the negative zone in the comics or going into space or going into a neutron star. But the biggest mystery of all, I think, is the birth of a baby, right? And this mysterious future of being
transformed magic trick,
into a parent, yes, in a moment. And we thought, well, what's the most high stakes place to have a baby in zero gravity, rotating around a neutron star? And
being pursued
by a Silver Surfer who literally is like out of a Grimm's fairy tale. I think when I came up with the idea of her reaching in, because I knew she had the phase ability to kind of reach into the womb and try to pull the baby out.
Terrifying.
Was what I was like, ooh, that's terrifying. Let's do it. And that still remains one of my favorite moments. But it is a little bit like, a Grimm's fairy tale, which just something is always coming for a child in one of those. And in this case, you have the largest, oldest, biggest thing in the universe that inexplicably to them wants the smallest, newest thing
and the most precious thing to them. Yeah,
exactly. And so now, not only do they have to protect their world, they have to protect their child. And this offer that Galactus has made to spare the planet, if they give them the child, is one of these impossible kind of Sophie's choice moments where, how can you choose between your planet and your child? But as a parent, you can never give up your child. And it feels like an impossible choice between two things that that they can't allow to happen. But this birth, you know, an amazing performance from all of them, but Vanessa Kirby, who just absolutely gave it her all here. And I love this notion that, you know, she staying visible is probably an effort for her.
Yeah.
Invisibility is probably more natural. And in this moment of exertion, I know being there with my wife and it's such a miracle and such a physical burden.
Yeah.
But like the idea that she loses visibility in this moment of birth, and, you know, spoilers, I assume if you're watching this, you will have seen the whole movie by this point. I don't know. But at the end, you know, when she's at her moment of death, she's going in and out of visibility as well. That, you know, these moments of birth and death are interconnected, are very, very close. So we had a real baby here on the day, and this is a mix of, like, you know, some CG and a real baby to bring this birth to life. There was a shot that I absolutely loved that we had in it for a long time, which was that Ben reaches out. And you kind of see that he almost does it, but the way we cut it out, you kind of de-emphasize it. But Ben floats Franklin across the gap between him and Reed, and then Reed stretches out and receives him. But as Franklin crosses the middle of the big window, they exit the hyperspace, and boom, there's the Earth right there, and Franklin is framed against the edge of the planet. And it's sort of a direct homage to 2001 and Kubrick and the Space Baby. And it was, you know, one of those things in filmmaking where you're like, this is the most important shot in the movie. And you execute it. I mean, you think it's beautiful, then you show it to a bunch of people, and they started to giggle because it just seems silly that you would float a newborn baby across the space.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, okay. And then it's the lesson of filmmaking where you're like, you literally have to kill your baby, not the real one, but you have to cut the thing that you never thought you would cut. The most important shot becomes the shot you need to lose. And it was the right decision. You know, because it took people out of the moment of the emotionality of this birth.
Moment.
And that birth used to be in different places. You know, the movie used to open with the birth of the baby in the opening action sequence.
Right.
And as we kind of played around with how the story could work, it landed here at the midpoint of the movie, sort of right after Galactus had dropped this Grimm's fairy tale deal. And I think it's right. I'm very happy that it ended up where it did. Yeah. You know, the drama of the moment. And we ended up doing something in filmmaking which you never quite, you know, which is always these happy accidents where you're like, oh, we developed this neutron star set piece, and we developed this birth set piece in Zero G at the opening of the movie when they were going to save a space station was the original idea. And they were like, oh, I can put those together. Right. And now you could have a birth in the middle of this neutron star thing.
Level up.
And you can level up by combining ideas.
Yeah.
They're ready for you. Step up.
This is the lobby of the Calatrava building in Oviedo, Spain, which, again, I mean, it was remarkable to find this building that felt like, I mean, I know Calatrava designed it, but it felt like you designed it, Gazzer, because it fits the movie perfectly.
Yeah, it was an unbelievable score to find this building, and for Tim Lewis and our amazing kind of producing team to figure out a way that we could get there and shoot this. It really makes it, and these are critical scenes, as you know, this scene in particular. I mean, there's so many critical scenes that we were able to capture. And it's also just so important, Matt, you were talking about this from the very start of it, that like you have to get into real locations. It just does something critically important for the scope and believability of the world, and thereby to a degree the film, if you can offset all these curated environments by adding in real places that have a scale and a materiality and a kind of patina that you can only achieve by a space that's been used by big numbers of people for long periods of time. Yeah. And this space absolutely provided that kind of anchor of realism to so much of it. Yeah. And if you have a real foreground, a real midground, you can kind of put anything you want. You can put a giant Galactus beyond that. Yeah. You can have a rock man walking around in a super realistic apartment set or a realistic Baxter lobby. Again, the more you have that's real, the more your mind will be tricked for the things that aren't. Yeah. And you did build this whole back wall. We did build the whole back wall, which is in the middle of their lobby to kind of create this connection with. Yes. Yeah. There were things we had to do to kind of synchronize it with the design of our building and of the Baxter apartment, materials we had to bring in, some specific details.
One of the things I really loved about that interior is you built this giant model of the Baxter Building, which was kind of a cross section you could see through, and each floor was labeled, which is a classic nod to Fantastic Four comics. One of the things I've loved that decade by decade, and it started with Kirby, where they would do a little doodle of the Baxter Building, a schematic, tell you where things
view
were
of the building.
Yeah, where the labs were, where the rockets were, where everything was kept.
Gym, the screening room, the like radar array, all that stuff. Yeah.
And every generation of Fantastic Four artists has kind of done their version of that. Yeah. And so we did that in model form in that lobby, which is great.
We blast it, problem solved.
You can't blast it. Conventional weapons won't work.
So we run. Draw them away from Earth.
We should talk about babies. We used multiple babies in the making of the film because you have to, because when you have very young babies, they only can be on set for a few hours at a time. And sometimes babies are not in the mood to be filmmaking, which I understand. I'm often not in the mood too, but I can't go home. I have to keep doing it. But the babies get a break when they need to. So we knew we wanted the baby to have one hero baby look, and that we would need to use every trick in the filmmaking book to bring that about, because we wouldn't have that baby available to us for the amount of time that we would need to film everything. So this is Ada in here. That's Pedro, but that's Ada there in the hands of Ben Grimm. And she was the hero Franklin. And she has wonderful expressiveness. Her eyes are just so alive. There are many scenes in this movie that Ada completely steals. She just seems very much like the progeny of the most brilliant man in the world, and probably the most brilliant woman too. And so we needed that. We needed that intelligence and that incredible sense of being alive, which she brought. But it meant that, like for instance, this stuff, we shot her and needed to pump her in to lots of different takes. So, we did this thing. She really was carried out of the space, and we had her in this environment, but then we needed to add her to Ben Grimm and combine her with different takes throughout. And then every now and then we didn't have her, but we had a CG version of her, and we could take the baby that we had filmed with, and because we had scanned Ada extensively and had a CG model of her, we could then transform the other baby to look like Ada. And that worked quite well for wide shots and medium shots. But we knew that pretty much for every close-up, we would need to have an actual close-up of Ada. So oftentimes we would go back with second unit and film Ada in all of the same lighting environments multiple times, just to make sure we had enough information so that we could add her. So sometimes her photography is actually done weeks after the scene, and we add her in, to try to make it persuasive. But making a CG baby was one of the big challenges of this film, and I think they did a great job.
Absolutely
tough one to pull off.
The sheer number of Titanic VFX feats that Scott and his team and Lisa had to pull off between, Ben and Johnny and the stretching and the baby and Galactus and the interior of the world ship. I mean, it's incredible. Each one of them is like a staggering feat, and they do all of them, and they did them so well.
Yeah. I mean, the workload on this movie is incredible, because we were building a period world, a retro future period world, as well as all of these CG characters. And like you said, all these powers. There's really not a shot in the movie that doesn't have a VFX in it somehow. Yeah. There might be 100 of them, I think, out of 3,000 or 2,500 or however many shots there are. But it's a tremendous number of visual effects in it. A staggering job that they did.
Galactus has just passed Jupiter.
Financial institutions remain closed as angry protesters take to
the newly formed Galactus cult.
All of this stuff had to be shot. We had to create the Galactus cult going up to meet their new leader at the top of Mount Everest.
As the whole world wonders, what is to be our fate?
This is an alleyway, practical location in East London, not far from
beautifully lit by
Jess Hall.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing shot. So many.
And that was close to a synagogue location that we used in East London as well. I remember that was a fun day out there.
Yeah.
But they choose not to.
And I talk about Stephen Wolfenden, who was our second unit director, who's incredible and a real storyteller, who had worked on all the Harry Potter films and just brilliant at doing anything really, like whether it's shooting baby stuff and getting magical stuff with Ada, or whether it's shooting those two pundits talking, in a perfect period way about should the Fantastic Four give up their baby, shooting crowds, shooting reactions to the launch, shooting action stuff, or, Fantastic Car flying around the streets at speed. His team did an amazing job, and second units are crucial on films, and there's oftentimes so much stuff just to get done. You never have enough time to get it done. And their team did an incredible job.
Mathematical, it's ethical, and it's available.
This becomes the big sort of moral quandary of the film, which is like, how do you save your world and also save your baby? And in the case of the Silver Surfer, as we'll learn later, she volunteered to become the Herald of Galactus in order to spare her planet. But in this case, this is a baby. This is a baby whose future is uncertain. The Fantastic Four don't know Franklin's nature. They don't necessarily believe what Galactus has said about Franklin and what his destiny is. And the baby is not able to say, yeah, I want to go and I'll serve Galactus. I'll to spare the planet. That's not possible. So in this particular situation, they can't accept either option, And this scene in particular is one of my favorites in the movie. I think it's beautifully written by Josh Friedman, one of our writers, who's a brilliant writer. And it feels like a real married couple.
Yeah.
This is part of every marriage, which is people don't always get along. Mm-hmm. And the things that you love about each other can sometimes become difficult and can become obstacles. And the fact that Reed is always thinking about the larger picture and trying to prevent all these terrible things from happening, sometimes it means that he's not thinking enough about, the small thing, the personal thing. Yeah. He's not thinking about as Sue feels. He's not being aware of how she feels in this scene. Mm-hmm. So it's beautifully acted between both of them, beautifully written by Josh, and involves some great subtle CG baby shots to help make this work, because we did have to replace some of the babies in Vanessa's arms, and I think they're very effective. And then this is one of my favorite shots in the movie. Beautiful. Just absolutely with an adorable little coo.
The light, just this beautiful light on Vanessa and on Ada, those shots.
Yeah.
But I am not giving him up.
And this is Sue being Sue, which is that, she doesn't accept the idea that it has to be one or the other, that it has to be the Earth or the baby. Mm-hmm. And she basically comes out without a real plan, exposed, not within a force field. And she brings that baby out and she says, "There's been a lot of talk about this baby, and I want you to meet Franklin. And I want you to know that I'm not going to abandon my child, and I'm not going to abandon you." And, this is so much about the sort of thematics of the movie and the idea that the Fantastic Four, unlike so many other superheroes who hide and have aliases and, they are very public figures. And I think that's one of the things that's made them so special over the years is they are the leading lights of their age. Sue is the head of the Future Foundation. She's basically the UN Secretary General. And while Reed might be the most brilliant man in the universe, she's probably the most emotionally brilliant person, you know. And Reed, I say, is great for mankind and struggles with individual men. Mm-hmm. He is adept at handling, the world from an emotional standpoint. She's a true leader in terms of bringing them together, inspiring. The speech is her sort of JFK speech, that we will not accept the idea that it's the planet or the baby, that we will find a solution. We don't know what it is yet, but I need you guys to believe in us and to believe that we can all do it together. This was shot outside. This is one of those where, it's an enormous set, but again, we couldn't build this entire area, but you built this amazing statue. You want to talk about this statue?
Yeah, this statue was, it's definitely a high point for me. I'm very, very proud of how it turned out. We had a lot of brilliant artists, from Alex Bailey, the art director, to Neil, the lead sculptor on this particular project, all the different trades. But basically, we wanted to come up with something that was super dynamic, that showcased their powers in a very subtle and elegant way, and that had a kind of composition that would, in a subtle way at least, evoke a symbol of a four that brought them together. And I was feeling very, very happy with it. And then I showed it to you. I remember an early sketch of it, and you had the great idea that we should create a little accent, kind of a focal point, specifically with Sue, that her outstretched arm be made of glass, and that the arm was kind of turning into the invisibility, and it became this very beautiful kind of point of accent in the overall bronze sculpture.
Yeah, it was amazing. Really an amazing work of art.
Well, just Earth. Sue? You solved it.
I did?
Yes.
And so here we are back in the lobby at Spain, and we have some Ada photography that we actually got on the day, and then also some Ada photography that we added later, as well as a little bit of CG work here.
You moved an egg across the room. You think you can do that with a planet?
We are out of options. We have to make it work. We will make it work. Heaven and earth.
We should probably talk about, these amazing actors. We've talked so much about design, and
right.
And I haven't talked enough about how wonderful they all are individually, and how great they were together as a family. And Reed Richards is a really tricky character. He in the comics, sometimes he's just the scientist sort of in the lab who's oblivious to what's happening outside, and he's just trying to solve everything. And sometimes he's a man of action out there trying to save the day, leading the Avengers, doing remarkable heroic stuff. Sometimes he's the family man, the father, the husband. He really has so many different aspects to him, and I knew that we needed all of them in this film. And then I knew I needed an actor who could bring all of those things to life. Someone who would be believable as this brilliant person, someone who was also terrific in moments of crisis and action. Oh, wait a minute, that was Kazra. We just missed Kazra's cameo in the movie as the Farsi translator, translating Sue's words, and you even rocked maybe the best mustache since Magnum PI.
Thank you, sir. It's a high point. I'm sure my wife and my mother will print out and frame that frame of film.
Yes, a huge part of the film. Yes, stunning
the
work.
Sequel will be all about the Farsi language translator.
Yes,
I'm confident.
Yes, exactly, 100%. We're building the sequel around him. But yeah, with Pedro, we needed someone who could do that, and also, Reed Richards is not without emotion. He actually has a tremendous amount. So much love for Sue, so much love for his family, so much love for Franklin, and then in the comics they have a daughter named Valeria. And so I knew that this emotional undercurrent was really important too, and that it would become more and more important as the film, went on into these huge, moments like the birth that we just witnessed, and certainly the end of the film, where that emotion would be much more on the surface. And so Pedro is a remarkable actor in that he's able to do all of those things. And I think all four of our lead actors, actually everybody in the movie, is this. I think of them as kind of Swiss Army knives, right? They're kind of every tool available to them, like any tone, any style. So really it's just about getting on the same page. And we had 3 weeks of rehearsal, getting together and figuring out this world and this family and how we wanted to approach things, and to build that chemistry that's so important. And Vanessa Kirby, same way, just such range, incredible range. Eben and Joe here, both brilliant actors who are alive. Lots of little moments of improv that they brought to the movie that are some of my favorite moments in the movie.
Great brothers dynamic, and warmth and humor, and it's a very full. The full palette of emotions is constantly being provided between the four of them. It's very dynamic and engaging all the time.
Here's Ada looking at Pedro
Amazing
in a
eyes.
Remarkable way, as if she's hearing exactly what he's saying as he talks about his vulnerability and his concern about how there's something that's wrong with him because he's so brilliant, but sometimes he doesn't feel like he can access every part of, his emotional life, and that he misses some things because he's so focused on the bigger picture. This whole fight that he had with Sue comes into this scene here as he's being vulnerable with his son, and Ada is super alive in this. And then I love this moment here when he says, "Are you a little space god?" And she, claps her hands together like Mr. Burns on Simpsons, it's like just so much life, and, really connected and really present. And that was one of my favorite scenes. It was one of my favorite scenes on the page, and definitely one of my favorite ones when we were filming. And I also love this relationship. You know, there's so much family even between Johnny and Herbie, who he calls Herbert every now and then. Every time he rubs Herbie's head, Herbie makes like a little kind of happy dog noise. Like, you know, he just loves when Johnny pays attention to him.
Oh, wow.
And here we have a future Foundation flag on the moon because they got there first. No Apollo 11 in our world. And then this enormous shadow, you know, of the world ship coming. These are some absolutely gorgeous shots of the bridge technology being deployed around the world. And we worked with Sarah Shepard, our dialect coach, who helped create the Zenlavian language. And she worked with some linguists, and we came up with all of this stuff for Johnny, who's cracking the Zenlavian language based off of these gold records, which are, of course, a reference to the Voyager journey, where we sent out a gold record that had, lots of information about Earth's culture in case an alien came in contact with it. We love the idea of gold records. And here is full mission control. So now we're, in Apollo 13 territory as they're getting ready to move the Earth, taking advantage of all these amazing circles and this really wonderful set.
Yeah, this workstation was an unbelievable build by Ty's props team and Jilly and Fergus, her assistant buyer. Like, the amount of complexity and detail in this mission control area is mind-boggling, and absolutely stood up to being right next to it, which I hope in some small way contributed to the performances. Fantastic work by the team.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
What is that?
What's happening?
And so the surfer shows up, ruins their plan. This is sort of a all is lost moment for them as they realize they can't get away from Galactus, and their amazing sort of Fantastic Four idea of moving the planet isn't going to work, and that she's going around the world destroying bridges and is going to come for them and come for Franklin. And this is where Johnny gets to, be the hero in a great way. And he's, the youngest one. He's, it's easy for them to kind of have a laugh at him. Earlier he tries to tell them about how he spoke to her, she spoke to him, and they kind of dismiss it a little bit, But what I've always loved about Johnny is that he is, he was on that mission for a reason. He is incredibly smart. And, he was young when his whole life was transformed. He didn't quite know who he was. And so part of his journey in this movie is to kind of figure out who he is. And, he dreams of space. He dreams of exploration. And they don't do enough of that. They're grounded more on Earth at the beginning of our movie. And Reed's afraid of going back into space a little bit because of what happened to them and how they were transformed. But Johnny still dreams of it. And he meets this character, Shala Ball, and he's fascinated by her. He wants to do what she can do, which is fly the stars, right? See every part of the universe. And then as he becomes more and more fascinated with her language, he gets to know more and more about her, learns about her history, learns about the sacrifice she made and how she saved her planet and saved her family, and ended up being the Herald of Galactus. And, she, in this scene, is a great performance from Julia Garner too, as she's, remembers her past, remembers her own family, and also has to remember all of the other planets that weren't as lucky as her planet, the planets that she brought Galactus to, where so many people died and so many families were killed. And so Johnny comes up with this amazing plan on the fly and manages to touch a chord of humanity in the surfer.
You were some sort of...
This amazing beach was filmed in Los Angeles, not far from LAX. There's some cargo ships that were painted out, a few other things. But, we had to film this in LA because of Julia Garner's schedule. But it was great. It was a kind of wonderfully overcast day, which I think made all of these colors and everything much richer. And here we get to see this moment where, she sacrifices everything to become the Silver Surfer. I absolutely adore this shot, you know, his eyes open here, these amazing eyes that Ryan Meinerding designed. And then it's Julia's performance there. It really feels quite alive. And then this whole sequence we filmed with Julia, you know, where she is overwhelmed by hearing the screams and the sounds of civilizations and planets dying. And all these, you know, tears you see are real. You know, it's her performance driving all of this.
You brought Galactus to all of these planets, and now you're bringing him here, to my home, to my family.
We had to create a bunch of other languages here too, not just Zenlavian. So Sarah had to create a bunch of different planets, you know, screaming for help. And it had to be clear that they were screaming for help, you know, because we wouldn't translate it or subtitle it.
Just trying to save my world, you know.
Johnny's flame on sort of effect, the Human Torch effect was deceptive. I thought, oh, well, we all know what someone on fire looks like. That'll be easy. But how do you create something that's glowing from the inside? You know, we did a lot of tests. We filmed a lot of different things on fire, not actually Joe Quinn ever. But we did light up, you know, forms that we had. We heated up things to see what, you know, when you made, you know, sort of different materials glow, what would it look like? And we used that as reference in creating this look for him. And then we also had an LED vest that Jess and his team made to kind of, you know, that Joe could wear so that it would be proper interactive light. And then because the surfer is a mirror essentially, which is very tricky, we had a reflective version of her head that we brought in and used kind of like the rock for Ben that we would have and see what the lighting looked like with her in every single environment. I really wanted her to look like an old mirror. I love that idea of coppering and the sense of like, you know, seeing the tarnish of, you know, she's been flying the stars.
Texture and history. And not just a perfect characterless mirror.
9 million years of flying the stars. And so it was that blend of like, how reflective could she be? And we cheated a little bit. Sometimes she's more reflective, sometimes less. We had to shape the lighting very carefully because she is a mirror, and sometimes reflecting everything means you don't feel enough of the emotion. You don't feel enough of the performance. So we had to alter that a little bit from time to time. So all of this, you know, built, you know, that we've, nothing's going to change, they say to each other in the bathroom at the beginning of the movie. And then obviously, while the baby's being born, Sue says everything's going to change. And he says no. And then they fight about, you know, how can you think of the worst thing, you know, when it relates to our child? And here we are in this moment of crisis where they've managed to turn the surfer, taken the surfer off the table, but Galactus is still coming. The Earth is still threatened. Things are really dire. And Reed realizes that there's only one way to save the day, and it does involve putting their child at risk. And, you know, so this is the sort of continued story of this kind of marriage fight, you know, and these two people with very strong opposing thoughts kind of having to come together and make a decision. And Sue ultimately knows in this moment that Reed's right, that this is the only way to defeat Galactus. And that they are going to have to take this risk, but it doesn't mean that she comes to it easily. You know, and this is, I think there's a tremendous performance here by all four of them, but Pedro and Vanessa are remarkable in this. And the emotion that you see, the war that is happening within Sue as she realizes what Reed has figured out. You can see that sort of anguish, that personal anguish there, which is remarkable. She's putting it together here. It's a really wonderful performance, both of them. And Reed knows there's only one solution, but he can't kind of bring himself to tell her that this is the only way. They must use Franklin. So this is sort of a dramatic, I think, high point for the film in terms of performance.
And Ben's got his beard here.
Oh, yeah. We haven't talked about Ben's beard. Which was a great thing, you know, that is in the comics. He gets spiky. There's spikier versions of Ben in the comics. And I always liked that. And so we came up with this idea that he gets spiky every day and he just has to shave. And you know, he uses this grinder that Reed probably made for him and he shaves it down. And then during the, you know, the world worldwide conservation of power moment. His grinder doesn't work, and he ends up getting spiky in a way that he doesn't like, and he's ashamed. And Johnny goes, a beard would look good.
That's cool.
And so we end up with a bearded Ben. And a bearded Ben does have some precedent in the comics, which I love. But this is, again, a Ryan Meinerding design, which I think is really fun.
Yeah.
Gives us a Ben we haven't seen in film before. And also, I think it's nice. Here's a guy who secretly wants to be human again. And these are these little ways that he can, which is why I also don't have a shirtless Ben in the movie very often.
Right.
Like he takes it off when he jumps in the water at the beginning to pull the ship out. But that kind of classic shirtless Ben wearing short shorts, from the Kirby run. That's one of those early comic book things I chose not to do, because to me, it felt like this is a guy who wants to be human,
wants to be a person,
who is a person, and would dress in a human way, unless they're going out in a spacesuit or a tech suit or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we had one nod to the comic early on because, he's jumping in the river. Sure. It makes sense.
Johnny, go check, see if they're.
This is one of my favorite scenes. These guys are very funny. A lot of this is improv.
I'm definitely not going to check.
And then I love the Andy Warhol portrait of Johnny Storm in the background there. So, Johnny's one of the most famous people in the world, of course. Warhol would have done a silk screen.
Yeah.
Come on.
But just, again, the fun family dynamic and the idea of Sue just appearing. And I love this last moment here of Ben. I hate when she appears. I don't like that. He's so sensitive. He's so sweet. This big tough guy, and doesn't like to be scared.
No, exactly.
This is an amazing prop that you and
Ty's team threw together. This amazing baby carrier that just fits exactly the aesthetic of the Fantastic Car and clicks in just as you would expect. All the mothers and fathers out there would,
of course,
will know.
we know how difficult they are. Ben is wearing a Brooklyn Dodgers hat here. This was much discussed. In one comic run, I think they have Ben as a Yankee fan, which always felt wrong to me because, those are the fat cats from the Upper East Side, right? Yeah. And he feels, with a Yancey Street, like he'd root for the bums from Brooklyn,
right? Exactly.
And I also love the idea that in our world, they haven't moved to Los Angeles. They're still there.
They're still there.
Still in Brooklyn. Yeah. That in this retro future alt universe, things stayed the way they should have been.
Right.
And also it's blue in a great way.
Yeah.
So I talked to
fantastic.
Jack Kirby's son, Neil Kirby, just to kind of make sure I could, dial this in appropriately in case they grew up Yankee fans. And he said, no, I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan as a kid. His dad wasn't a big baseball fan. Jack wasn't a big baseball fan, but he was a big boxing fan. Okay. But he's like, no, he would absolutely be a Brooklyn Dodger fan. And
that's awesome.
That's how we settled on that. Everything we went back to the source. Here's Paul Walter Hauser, who I worked with on one of his first professional jobs, I think, on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And he was amazing. He was very young and he could hold his own with those guys and improv. It was so funny. And I've just been so thrilled to see his career grow, winning Emmys and all sorts of other awards for his work. And so when we were thinking about who could be Mole Man, Harvey Elder, Paul seemed perfect. And he brings so much, humor to it, but also, a lot of gravitas here, and I love his relationship with Sue. These are two leaders who kind of understand each other. And he was once an enemy, now an ally, and he's going to help them evacuate the entire New York City to Subterranea, which, we should talk about as well, because part of our approach to practical filmmaking, what you're looking at is real. This is a real mine in the middle of England. And we first we had built this set very, very deep. And we found this thing called Cathedral Row. That's what the mine folks called it. It was epic.
Yeah, but there was 10 minutes of driving underground, basically, to reach it.
Of Earth to prepare for what could be our final moments. The hours ahead may feel long, but we must use them.
It was great. I mean, you guys built such an incredible world down there.
Thanks. Yeah, it was really an amazing collaboration between Jilly's fantastic set deck team and our construction department led by art director Oliver Goodyear to build the Mole Man HQ, which was a kind of an adaptation of a disused bus, and to create this sort of hub of activity where you can imagine Harvey held court in the layers of dressing and stuff, that kind of old stuff from the first half of the 20th century, we imagine, brought down, things that had been cast off by society on the surface, had been kind of salvaged and reused down in Subterranea, which had a kind of maybe a more humble feeling initially. And I think that's sort of the arc of Subterranea and Harvey's collaboration with Sue is to get better treatment and acknowledgement for the people of Subterranea. So we wanted to kind of represent the before state of that in the decor.
I really want to have one of those giant drills that I could drive around in.
Yeah, the giant Retrofuture drill.
They're really, 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 really cool.
Oh, it's amazing texture here on Galactus's neck to get a great sense of the scale in these shots.
And this was all, Jess lit this beautifully. This is, Ralph's performance. And obviously there's a ton of beautiful CG work on top of it, but a lot of this is really close to what we filmed in camera. I love that it's starting to snow here. It snowed beautifully the night before. I love those shots of Ben walking on Yancey Street with the little bits of snow on his coat. Frame Store did so beautifully. And just the sense that we start this movie really in the spring. Everything is bright and lovely and optimistic. And by the end here, as the world is threatened, we've entered into, it was Halloween when they launched to go to Galactus, and now we're heading towards Christmas when he's arrived.
Great shot of the fantastic car there, and this amazing shot, which I knew when we were conceiving it that would be epic, and this, a lot of this stuff here, I want to just tip my hat to Richard Bennett, who's an incredible storyboard artist too. One of the best, and has done a lot of kaiju stuff, King Kong, Godzilla as well. But I've worked with him on many things over the years. He's brilliant, and these shots, like, Galactus standing up, water dripping off of him, turning around, looking at the Statue of Liberty, all this stuff is just amazing. It comes right out of his boards, and so cool.
And he still hand draws them all too. Yeah. And so,
incredible.
The artistry is just amazing. But
speed he can draw at, I've never seen anything like it.
Speed and quality, like, at the same time, is really amazing. And so he really led the charge on Galactus here in this third act set piece. And the scale here. But again, Ralph was really in this suit shooting all of this stuff. And then ILM is doing the work throughout this sequence on top of that. And just, I love these shots that come up here, like this, heaving, the size, the giant boots coming through.
A number of people that have asked me how that shot was done, because it's in the trailer.
Yeah.
Because it's so real. All of it is so real.
And yet it's all virtual.
And it's all virtual.
We shot some tarmac, we shot some cars, things like that for, but so much of it is ILM.
Yeah.
But it's based off
job.
of, Richard Bennett's boards, and on the pre-visualization of the third floor did. But here you are, the collision of the oldest, most, enormous thing and the small, most innocent thing coming together. Likes this idea, of creating a magnifying glass and what would happen to Johnny's flame if it went through one of Sue's fields, kind of like, little kids torturing ants, but it means that, Johnny is even more powerful, and all they need to do is to distract him for a moment in order to be able to do this swap and to get Franklin to safety, which works. And it also manages to poke the bull, which is what they're trying to do. They want him to walk into this bridge. They want him to not think about this, and he's almost doing exactly what they want them to do, but he's Galactus, and he won't be fooled so easily. And so this is also one of my favorite moments here, when this big boot hovers over this line and the jig is up.
The tension.
And then he says, he calls them clever little bugs in a second, which is sort of a classic Galactus line.
Right.
Ants, bugs,
right.
Tiny things. Everyone is inconsequential to him, but he's kind of moderately impressed at this point. And then off he goes. We destroyed so many buildings in New York City. But because they're the Fantastic Four, everybody's safely down below.
Exactly. They're in Subterranea.
And with Reed Tech, they'll rebuild all of this stuff, no problem. So here is this fast-moving Fantastic Car, which some of this stuff is ILM. Some of that stuff is actual plate photography of a fast-moving Fantastic Car, which Stephen Wolfenden, the second unit, went out to this old Air Force base in England and took the stunt version of the Fantastic Car, which had an electric engine in it, a Tesla engine in it, and it hooked as they, had a stunt driver swinging around curves. And so a lot
amazing stuff
based off of that photography.
This is so cool. Galactus on fire.
Galactus on fire. You can't be stopped. Ben being thrown out in space.
So ominous. It's amazing.
Ben being tossed out of the atmosphere. As Eric Pearson, one of our screenwriters, had this fun idea. Just Galactus doesn't care. He's just going to throw him out of the atmosphere.
Right.
Love this moment, which of course then helps to set up one of the runners in the movie, which is clobbering time. We made a whole cartoon, which if you stay through to the end of the credits, you get to see the wonderful animated opening to a kind of in-universe Fantastic Four cartoon made by an animation company called Titmouse. Amazing. They also worked on WandaVision for me, doing a Bewitched opening, Bewitched style opening to one of WandaVision's episodes. And so they made this great opening, and part of that has Ben saying clobbering time, which makes it famous. And so we love this idea of playing with their catchphrases. Catchphrases in comics are always great. It took, Marvel Studios a decade before Captain America said Avengers Assemble.
Right.
And we liked the idea of playing around with it a little bit too. So, the toy in the kitchen says flame on until Ben smashes it saying flame off. And here we were building to clobbering time, which is coming up in a second, where Ben actually says it finally again.
This is so cool. This is really clever.
So all of this stuff, this is Reed really at wit's end trying to stop Galactus, but he's still brilliant, and he knows how Galactus is fed with those tubes. And so he's trying to literally drain him of lifeblood, and it's almost working. This is an image literally trying to copy a Goya painting, Saturn devouring his children, which I love. And here he is stretching the stretchiest man in the world and just enjoying it almost like a kid, playing with, pulling the legs off of an insect or something. And we really wanted this to be impactful. We wanted him not to have stretched nearly as far as this before. So we would understand that now he's being stretched too far. And stretching is a big thing. This is, we should take a moment to probably talk about stretching, because it's the hardest one to translate into film. People on fire, people being invisible, rock guy, we can kind of understand those things. Yeah. But nobody can stretch in the real world the way Reed does. An octopus can kind of jam itself through tiny holes and do amazing things. But we try to figure out how do we do this and make it work in live action. I think it works great in animation.
With an organism that has a skeleton.
Exactly. And so we wanted to maintain anatomy. There's always a wrist, there's always an elbow, there's always a shoulder. You can see the muscles in there. We looked a lot at Alex Ross, who's an amazing comic book painter, artist, writer. And he always keeps these kind of heroic portions for Reed, even when he's stretching. There's a dynamic to it. And the way he moves quickly like Spider-Man, in our version of him. So we're not living very long in these sort of uncanny poses. The stretching is happening fast. There's a kind of elastic quality to it. Yeah. And we also thought a lot about conservation of mass. Like if you're going to stretch your arm really far, you need to take it from your leg or your waist or something. And so that's what so much of the stretching that you see here is based off of. And I also wanted to use it kind of when he had to, as opposed to, I think, using it for comic purposes or, just kind of having it happen here, there, or everywhere. But it's something it's done purposeful, and it's done in moments of high stakes for the most part. Yeah. He stretches a bit in the lab because he's busy doing a bunch of different things, but it's always got a purpose to it. All right. So now Galactus has a baby, and we have, a battle between, Sue and Galactus here, a battle that she should not be able to win, but because so much is at stake, she's literally willing to sacrifice herself to push Galactus towards Times Square and to get their child back. And this was just an unbelievable performance from Vanessa
Incredible.
gave it her all, just for hour after hour after hour, several days of this required, because of all the different areas that she was doing this and the different moments of the story. She was a rock star.
Well, and you can see that the sort of disbelief in Reed's eyes too. Like, he just can't believe that she's able to do this.
Yeah. This notion, I think as parents, which we all feel, which is, you'd do anything to save your child. The parent who, full of adrenaline, can lift the car off of their kid. And it was the idea of, okay, well, what if what's the version of that if you're already a superpowered person? And it's this, which is that she's able to lift, the biggest creature in the universe.
Yeah. She's using all the reserves. She's not saving anything for herself. She's just using everything in her.
Her last full measure. And then, but, she's, hits a snag here. Galactus is grabbing this building. Ben comes to her aid. Like, everybody is working together as a team, which is really important. They're all doing what they need to do. Save this world, save this baby.
Crosses the line.
Right. Yeah. Which we've set up earlier. A lot of debate about how many seconds.
Yeah.
Can't seem too long. Can't be too short.
Right. Amazing images. Franklin just barely. That's nuts. Yeah. So cool. So well calibrated by you guys and Scott.
Great work from ILM. You can see that field kind of engulfed the hand just as Reed saves the baby. And then this real stunt.
Yeah.
An amazing stunt performer, which I think that was a tough one. She did great. Then emotion, the emotion of birth, the emotion of death, trying to make this feel as real as possible. Black comes back like a horror film, villain here, which sets up this wonderful moment for Johnny, who has offered to sacrifice himself several times, who is willing to do what Shalabal did. And now in this last moment, as the seconds tick away, he knows that it's on him and he's willing to do it. But then at the last minute, this happens, which is a wonderful shot.
Yeah.
Really well executed and based off of, again, Richard's boards and an amazing previs by Third Floor, Pat Gellin, Pat Haskew, who are supervisors there, amazing artists. And then finally, boom, they're gone. Thrown to the other side of the universe where, we won't hear from him for millions of years. And poor Ada, she was upset that morning. Feel bad.
Yeah. But performance-wise,
but it worked for the feed, but she was fine. Nothing was done to her.
I'm glad she's okay.
She was happy. But just in that moment, babies cry. And then this, resurrection here, was a very difficult thing. I think there's trying to figure out sound design, trying to figure out her look. She's obviously very pale. We wanted to make sure it was understood that she was gone. And then this is where that amazing emotional, work of Pedro comes to the surface, and his desperation to save her is so believable, powerful, culminating really in this incredibly sad resignation moment when he realizes that he can't save her and that she's truly gone. Is really heartbreaking. And he does this thing where he goes down and kisses her, and one tear falls from his eye onto her cheek, and it's just there in the performance, no VFX happening there. He really brought it, she brought it in that incredible battle against Galactus, and then Pedro brought it amazingly here. And they did, all four of them did every day, but this in particular, here's this shot, which, when I saw it on the day, I was just stunned.
Yeah. Perfect. that face also. I mean,
Yeah.
so much emotion here.
You know, watching your sister die and maybe never having the language or knowing what to do with yourself. Even he's just kind of frozen, you know.
Yeah.
And then here's Ada actually on the day, which was amazing. We filmed a lot of her on different days, but this performance is, again, these moments where you're like, does the baby understand the
What's
scene
going
that
on
she's
here?
playing?
Right. Yeah.
Because her hands are doing what they needed to do.
Right.
She's focused. She was crying, as you saw in different parts of the scene, and then stopped.
Right.
He's making eye contact. I mean, sure, we did a few tricks. We had, you know, some toys down below to draw her eye.
Right.
But like, it was these moments where I was like, this baby knows what's happening and what her job is in the scene, and she shouldn't, because she's a baby.
Right.
Including, you know, the shot that comes up here in a second, which she just did. She just clapped after she resurrected her mother. And it was, I didn't make her do it. I didn't ask her to do it.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just those lucky moments in filmmaking where you're like, wow, that just happened, you know?
Yeah. It's so cool.
So much of this moment, I just love the sort of the music in here is beautiful. The restraint, you know, holding out on the music for as long as possible, keeping it absolutely quiet until you hear the one, you know, twitch of her finger, you know, just trying to kind of hide what's happening as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know, to keep it mysterious, you know, and then just until you see the stars really in Vanessa's eyes, and you understand that this loss of, you know, the death of Sue has opened up something in Franklin, has triggered this power cosmic that Reed could never find, and all the scans that he was doing, that something has awakened.
Yeah.
And they realize it. And she says, you know, he's not like us, he's more. So Galactus is sort of right, but not really, right? That there's something mysterious and unknown about the child. And that, to me, was what the movie was so much about, because I think as parents, we have that same feeling, right? We worry about our children. We want the best for them. Their future is unknown.
Yeah.
Parental anxiety, you know, is something that these folks have just like we do, but that ultimately you have to kind of accept that whatever their future is kind of up to them. And all we can do is do the best to love them and protect them and support them now. And then they will have to take their first steps out into the world and do what they're going to do.
That's right.
And that's what they're saying here backstage. You know, he's, you know, who knows what he will become, but he's here now. So we're going to love him.
Adorable.
Yes.
Five
onesie.
Suit.
Yep.
Onesie tech suit.
That kind of stuff.
Can't even sit up without help.
This is Pinewood Stage, one of the classic early Pinewood stages where Kubrick shot stuff and Bond movies were shot, and we were using it as backstage for the Ted Gilbert show.
Who knows where his powers will take him? But right now, he's here.
What's that guy doing?
Got him.
Explorers, heroes, citizens, or leaders, they continue to change.
I love, Joe fixing his hair after the baby messed with it.
Yeah.
Great moment.
Exactly.
And even Ada there, just putting her hand on Pedro's face in such a wonderful way. This audience was great. They really got into it.
Beautiful light. Once again,
this is our split screens. We do a lot of this kind of boxes and stuff in the movie, very 60s inspired, Thomas Crown Affair, that kind of stuff. But you can see the period lighting in there. We use so much period lighting, vintage lenses. Here's Ben, precious cargo, rushing down the hallway. And then this was a scene that existed in every version of the script. It moved around. It was on a spaceship because they had the baby at the beginning of the movie. It was, I just never wanted to let it go because all of us parents out there know
I've done this so many times. Yeah.
Car seats are tough.
Yeah.
Even retrofuturistic Reed Richards ones are tough, especially if they have like a really annoying buzzer that tells you you're not doing it
That's
right.
right. Yeah.
The
so feedback.
This was a fun one. And these guys did a ton of improv, and, you know, it felt, very alive, and bickering at each other. I love, Ben saying he can't feel his hands, and Johnny saying he did pull the slack, and all this stuff feels very familiar. You know, I think that's what the charm of the Fantastic Four is that they're a real family. You know, it was a bold idea in the 60s to make a superhero team about a real family. And I think it works because they're like us. They're relatable. Here they are flying off to save the day. This end title sequence is by Perception. They also did the end title sequence credits for WandaVision. They've done a lot of great stuff for Marvel over the years. And I thought they really just knocked it out of the park using a lot of stuff that Kazra created here. The graphics department.
Posters. Jason Swear's graphic designer. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's even some fun little stuff in here that didn't make the cut. Like we did commercials. We made our own in-world commercials for little bubble cars that you made that were adorable. This was from an opening where they gave a tour of the Baxter Building, kind of like Jackie Kennedy's tour of the White House.
That's right.
Some of this is concept art from Ryan Meinerding and his team. It really was a chance to kind of pull together, things that we didn't get a chance to use in the full movie or only had used snippets of. But I love how it's, like this is, we had a longer Red Ghost and the Super Apes opening there, and you see Reed getting his face stretched by, one of the monkeys, which is a reference to a great Alex Ross painting of Reed getting his face stretched. So it's got a lot of little Easter eggs of things that didn't end up in the final cut, but they're really wonderful. I loved all the magazines you guys made.
Yeah. Harris and Dom, our graphics team, they did so many fantastic, really layered, detailed things for the background of all the sets. It's awesome to get to showcase some of them here in the credits.
Oh, I love them. The flipping through the sort of Teen Beat type magazine with Johnny, with the insert with all of his photographs, posing in his sort of coquettish ways. But this was, really meant to be, again, retro-futuristic in style. It has a kind of Saul Bass feel with the split screen and all of that with the boxes. But it also has a polish to it that makes it feel like it's slightly more elevated and more futuristic. 4 years later, a little snippet of what's to come. They've changed the colors here for, this look at Avengers Doomsday, moving a little more into the 70s.
Yeah,
a little bit into the oranges. Franklin's grown up, and here we get our sort of, glimpse of things to come.
Herbie, have you seen the book that Franklin loves? Not that one. We did that one yesterday, and I know he loves it, but here we are. Here. See, we're going for something a little bit more fun today, yeah?
And we changed our sort of, the hair as well for Sue.
Yeah.
Different era slightly, which is what's really fun about Fantastic Four. And we started in our sort of 1960s, moving them into the 70s. Like there's just, it's a really fun opportunity design wise.
Yeah. To see the progression in the space and oh, wow.
And there he is.
Yeah.
Dr. Doom, things to come. It's amazing how many super talented people are required to put a movie together of this size. And it just, every time I watch this crawl and see the amazing folks who worked on this, sort of takes my breath away. So many talented people.
Yeah, in different countries, over such a sprawling period of time, between the prep, the shoot, and the post. It's a small army of people that go into doing this.
Truly talented. I think we've called out so many of these folks already, from Jilly, the set decorator, and Rowley, our stunt coordinator, and then Alex Byrne, our costume designer, and Dan Grace, who is the costume supervisor, who did an incredible job as sort of her field general of organizing and pushing through all of these things from both an artistic and also just a logistic standpoint.
Yeah,
amazing.
Always had an answer.
Tristan, our post-production supervisor, who made post work so well. Just an incredible group of in-house VFX folks.
Alistair, SFX Soup.
Built the Fantasticar in part and built Herbie and
Yeah.
did a great job. Ty, who we just saw go by as our prop master, who built this entire world in an incredible way. Gaffer Lee, who lit this thing beautifully. Steve Key Grip and his team that, we worked almost exclusively off a techno crane, and his team did a wonderful job, making all these complicated shots work. It's a dance. It requires a lot of folks to bring to life. Look at how many carpenters.
Yeah, just the carpenters, the plasterers, brilliant plasterers, the painters, sculptors, all of these brilliant artisans, so many of them required to do this.
Yeah, incredible. Hats off to Graham here, listed among the drivers who drove me back and forth every day. Lovely human and hard worker, and made things go very smoothly for me. Thank you, Graham. Spain unit, we're hosted there by a wonderful group from Sur Film, and made that all possible in Oviedo. We shot plates in New York, again, to make things look as real as possible. We got as much New York photography as we could. And again, I mentioned we shot on the beach in LA.
Yeah.
These folks made that possible. And these are all the folks at Marvel Studios who are amazing. Hats off to Danielle Costa, who runs visual effects, Chris Russell, who runs post-production, Mitch Bell, who was in charge of production, and everyone who works with them. Truly an incredible group. Fantastic Four, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bunch of folks, special thanks, all of the amazing comic book artists and writers that worked as inspiration for us, but also as advisors. And then SPI here, I want to call out Theo, who is the VFX supervisor, did a brilliant job at SPI. A lot of Galactus's world ship, Silver Surfer, was handled by SPI and this amazing team. ILM, Daniele, who was our supervisor there, so talented. Again, a lot of the Galactus third act set piece when Galactus comes to New York is Daniele and his team, in addition to lots of other things throughout the movie, but did a brilliant job working on Ben as well. They were one of the leads on developing Ben Grimm, Digital Domain. Phil and his team there, they did a lot of work on Ben as well as CG babies and bringing Franklin to life. So much work. Frame Store, hats off to Rob. They did a ton of space. The neutron star, escaping Galactus' ship, Wormhole, just beautiful work throughout as well. But that was their main focus was this escape in that section. Weta did a lot of great work early in the movie when we're establishing their powers and who they are. Thanks to everyone else here, Rise and Base. Rise did a lot of the bridge shots around the world alongside Base. Barnstorm, capital T. Cantina worked a lot on WandaVision with me, did a ton of the stuff you see in TVs and the sort of period ads and things like that. Really beautiful work. And Imaginarium, I just want to hats off to them. Everyone at Imaginarium, Andy Serkis and his partner Matt, who they were very helpful with us and helped Eben and Julia learn about mocap and understand. Andy developed that whole sort of world, starting with Gollum and then Caesar and Planet of the Apes, and he is the sort of the Yoda of that world, and he's so generous with his time. I want to thank Matthew Wood and his Loop Group. There are several members of Loop Group, are amazing actors I've worked with in theater who came out and helped out. Helen, Hugo, Leo. Thank you guys for doing that. Great soundtrack. I want to call out Andrea, Let Us Be Devoured, which is a song played over this section here, which she wrote as a kind of in-universe song about Galactus coming, almost as if sort of Joan Baez had written it.
That's great.
And we had planned to use it earlier in the movie, but couldn't figure out how to make that work. And so we put it here at the credits, and it really it fits beautifully here at the end. Especially formatted in IMAX. The entire movie is in IMAX. I'm a big fan of IMAX.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure working with them to develop this film. And to see, Galactus in all of the IMAX glory is great. I want to just mention Jamie Christopher, who was our original line producer on this film and worked for Marvel for many years, who unfortunately passed away early in our process. Amazing human and amazing filmmaker. There's a great quote. If you look at my characters, you will find me. No matter what kind of character you create or assume, a little of yourself must remain there. Jack Kirby. And that's true. And that's the special sauce of the Fantastic Four, is that they are based on real people. You know, Jack had a daughter named Sue, and I think there's a Ben in the family there too. These are based on real people, and that's what makes them so relatable and so special. It's clobbering time. And this is Titmouse's amazing animated opening for an in-universe Fantastic Four cartoon.
Clobbering time.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching.